I stood in my own living room and didn't recognize it. That's the part that stayed with me longest. Not the anger, not the disbelief, just that quiet, stupid confusion like walking into the wrong house. Except the door had opened with your key, and the walls were still the color you chose 3 years ago, and the scuff on the baseboard near the coat closet was still there from the time you moved that bookshelf in by yourself because you couldn't afford movers. It was my house, every square foot of it, but my brother was sitting on my couch, his feet up on my coffee table, watching a game on my television, drinking from the mug I bought in Portland on a work trip 2 years ago. The blue one with the chip on the handle I'd always meant to throw away, but never did. He looked up when I walked in. He didn't stand, didn't apologize, didn't look embarrassed. He looked annoyed, like I was the one intruding. Then his fiancée walked out of my kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel I didn't recognize, and she looked at me with this small, polite smile. The kind you give someone who's shown up early to a party that isn't theirs. "Oh," she said, "you're home early." Home, early. I didn't say anything. I couldn't figure out which part to address first. The fact that my brother had been living in my house without my knowledge. The fact that someone else's dish towel was hanging in my kitchen. The fact that the guest room door was half open, and I could see, through the gap, that my boxes, the ones I'd stored in there, had been pushed into the corner to make room for a clothing rack. I set my bag down on the floor. The drive from the airport had taken 40 minutes. My flight had been delayed 3 hours. I had a headache behind my right eye that had been building since somewhere over Ohio, and all I'd wanted, the entire way home, was to unlock my front door and just be in my space. Quiet. Familiar. Mine. I need to go back 3 years. Because none of this makes sense without the part that came before it. And the part that came before it starts with a house I had no business being able to afford, and 12 years of my life that I spent making sure I could. I grew up in a house where money was always the thing nobody talked about, but everybody felt. Not destitute. I want to be fair about that. We weren't missing meals. The heat stayed on. But there was a particular kind of low-grade financial anxiety that lived in our house like a fourth family member, the way it does in a lot of working-class households, where every unexpected expense is a small crisis, and every bill cycle brings a fresh round of quiet tension between the adults. My father worked in manufacturing most of his life. My mother worked part-time at a pharmacy until her knees got bad. They did what they could. I understood that even as a kid. But understanding something doesn't make it not leave a mark. I started working at 16. A grocery store, weekends and after school. Nothing glamorous. Bagging groceries, loading carts, sometimes working the register when they were short-staffed. I handed most of my first few paychecks over for household expenses without being asked, because I was old enough to notice the calendar on the refrigerator door where my mother tracked the bills, and I didn't need to be asked. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound noble. I'm telling you because it's the context for what came later. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had a steady job in logistics, supply chain coordination, which is as unglamorous as it sounds. But it paid well and rewarded the kind of obsessive attention to detail that I developed growing up in a house where mistakes cost money. I worked long hours. I skipped vacations. I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment with furniture I found on Craigslist, and I put almost everything I had into savings. I told myself I was saving for something specific, but for a long time I wasn't sure what. Then I drove past a house. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like a movie, but that's what happened. I was driving home from work one evening, a Tuesday, I think, in October, and I took a different route than usual because there was construction on my normal street, and I ended up going through a residential neighborhood I didn't usually pass through. And there was this house with a for sale sign in the front yard. It wasn't remarkable. It wasn't a mansion. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, a covered porch that needed repainting, a detached garage with a door that didn't quite sit straight in its frame. But there was something about the way the porch light was on in the early evening, warm and ordinary and completely specific to itself, that made me slow down. I sat in my car, outside that house for probably 10 minutes. I took a photo of the listing number on the sign and drove home. I called about it the next morning. The process took 8 months. Pre-qualification, The inspection that found a crack in the foundation that had to be renegotiated. The closing that almost fell through twice. 8 months of paperwork and waiting and double-checking numbers and lying awake at 2 in the morning recalculating everything in my head. And then I signed the papers, and the keys were in my hand. I sat in the empty house the night I got the keys. Just sat on the floor in the living room, no furniture yet, just bare hardwood and the smell of the old owners, and the particular silence of a space that hasn't adjusted to a new person yet. And I thought about my parents' kitchen table, and the bill calendar on the refrigerator, and the grocery store, and all those years of knowing I didn't want to spend my whole life in that kind of low-grade anxiety. I didn't call anyone that night. I just sat there, and it was enough. My parents came to see the house about 2 weeks after I moved in. My mother walked through every room and made small appreciative sounds. "Oh, look at the crown molding. And this kitchen is a good size." And my father shook my hand and said he was proud of me, which was not something he said often, so I held on to it. I gave them a key that afternoon. I want to be clear about this because it matters later. I gave them a key for emergencies. That was the word I used. Emergency. As in, if I'm ever out of town and there's a pipe that bursts or the power goes out or something happens and someone needs to get inside. I was not saying, "This house is also yours." I was saying, "I trust you and I want you to be able to help me in a crisis." I don't know when those two things became confused. I don't know when I stopped being someone my parents helped and started being something they managed. But I should have seen the first sign of it that same afternoon, when my mother paused in the doorway of the guest room and said, almost to herself, "Marcus would love a room like this." Marcus, my younger brother. I didn't think much of it at the time. I thought it was just something you say. I should have thought more. Marcus is 4 years younger than me, and if our childhoods overlapped in the same house, you might not know it from listening to our parents talk about them. I don't say that with anger anymore. I've processed enough of it to say it plainly. The favoritism in my family was real. It was consistent, and it wasn't subtle. It just lived in the language of love, so it was hard to argue with without sounding like you were arguing against love. Marcus was the charming one. I was the responsible one. And those aren't really equal designations, even though they're both presented as compliments. Charming means you get forgiven faster. Responsible means you get handed things to carry. Marcus changed jobs the way other people change TV shows. There was always a reason: a bad manager, a company culture that didn't fit, an opportunity that didn't pan out, and my parents always accepted the reason without pushing on it, the way you accept a child's explanation for why their homework isn't done. He'd land somewhere, find his footing, and then something else would happen. By the time he was 27, he'd had 6 jobs. He was back living with my parents. They didn't seem to mind. Their house, their dynamic, I stayed out of it. Marcus had expensive taste for someone with inconsistent income. Nice sneakers, the newest phone, a car lease he probably couldn't afford. I didn't ask where the money came from. I didn't want to know. He was my brother, and I loved him in the complicated, low-temperature way you love someone you grew up with, but don't fully understand. He could be genuinely funny. He could be generous with other people's time and attention in a way that made rooms like him. He just couldn't seem to hold a stable life together for more than 18 months at a stretch. And our parents kept quietly insulating him from the full consequences of that. I was in the middle of a work project when Marcus called me to announce his engagement. "Her name's Danielle," he said. "We've been together about 8 months. 8 months, I said. "I know what you're going to say." "I'm not going to say anything." He laughed. "Good, because we're happy and we're doing it." I told him congratulations. I meant it in the way you mean things when you're not sure if they're a good idea, but you're not the one who gets to decide. After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a minute and thought about nothing in particular. 3 weeks later, I left for a work assignment. The project was in Denver. 6 weeks, maybe 7 depending on how the system rollout went. I'd done stretches like this before, not unusual in my field, not comfortable but manageable. I made sure the house was locked up, utilities set, mail forwarding arranged. I called my parents when I landed. My mother asked if I'd eaten on the plane. My father asked how the weather was, normal conversation, nothing strange. I called them again 2 weeks in. My mother mentioned that she and my father had stopped by the house to check on things. I hadn't asked them to, but it wasn't alarming. They had the key for exactly this kind of thing. She said everything looked fine. 2 weeks after that, she mentioned it again. They'd stopped by again. I asked if something had happened. No, she said. We just wanted to make sure everything was okay. I didn't push on it. I had a system cut over the next morning, and my mind was elsewhere. The project wrapped in 6 weeks exactly. I booked my flight home for a Tuesday. I was going to take a few days off, sleep in my own bed, exist in my own space for a while before diving back into the normal workload. The flight was delayed. 3 hours in a terminal in Denver, eating bad airport food and nursing a headache. But I got home. I unlocked my door, and standing in the entryway, with my bag still on my shoulder, I registered, before I understood anything, that the air inside my house felt different. Not wrong exactly, just occupied. There was a faint smell I didn't recognize. Coffee and something else, a perfume or a candle, slightly floral. And near the door, where I usually kept my own shoes on the mat, there were 2 pairs I'd never seen before. Men's boots, size larger than mine. And next to them, women's flats. I stood there for a moment. Then I heard the television. And I walked into my living room, and my brother looked up from my couch. And his expression was not the expression of someone caught doing something wrong. It was the expression of someone mildly interrupted. I still wasn't sure what I was looking at. Then Danielle came out of the kitchen, and she smiled at me, genuinely, pleasantly, and said the 6 words that rearranged the next several months of my life. "Oh, you're home early." I set my bag down on the floor, and I called my parents. My parents picked up on the second ring. My mother, which meant she'd been near the phone. She answered with my name the way she always did, warmly, like she was glad to hear from me. And for a split second, the 2 or 3 seconds before I said anything, I had this strange thought that maybe I'd misread something, that there was an explanation I hadn't considered, that my brother and his fiancée were in my house for some reason that would make complete sense once I heard it. "Mom," I said, "Marcus is in my house." A pause, not a surprised pause. A pause like someone selecting their words. "I know, sweetheart. We were going to tell you." "When?" "When you got back. We were going to explain everything." I was standing in the hallway, outside the guest room. The door was open now, and I could see it clearly. The clothing rack. The duvet on the bed that was not my duvet. A small vanity mirror propped against the wall beneath the window where I used to keep a stack of books. "There's a clothing rack in my guest room," I said. They needed somewhere to put her things. "Mom." She stopped. "How long have they been here?" Another pause. Longer this time. "About 3 weeks." I put my hand against the wall. 3 weeks. I had been gone 6, which meant they had been in my house for half my trip, which meant my mother had called me twice during that time to tell me she'd stopped by to check on things. And what she had not mentioned was that my brother and his fiancée were inside, sleeping in my guest room, using my kitchen, sitting on my furniture. "I need to talk to Dad," I said. "He's right here." There was a muffled sound, the phone changing hands. Then my father's voice, lower and more careful than my mother's. "Son, why is Marcus in my house?" He cleared his throat. "Your brother needed a place to stay. He and Danielle, with the wedding coming up, they needed somewhere stable. The apartment they were looking at fell through. And your house." Silence. "We don't have the space," my father said. "You know that our place is. You have a guest room." "It's being used for storage." "I have a guest room too, Dad. It's being used for my storage." It was. He went quiet. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't have an answer. The quiet of someone who has decided the answer they have is the right one and is waiting for you to accept it. "Your brother is getting married," he said finally. "He needed stability. You were out of town. The house was just sitting there." The house was just sitting there. I leaned my back against the hallway wall and looked at my living room ceiling. The light fixture I'd replaced the first month after moving in, because the one that came with the house had a short in it and kept flickering. I'd done it myself, watching a tutorial on my phone, standing on a step stool for 2 hours. "He could have called me," I said. "You were busy." He could have asked. "We didn't want to bother you. So instead you gave him my house." "We didn't." My father stopped, adjusted. "It's temporary just until the wedding." "When's the wedding?" He told me. I did the math in my head. 4 months. They were planning to stay for 4 months. I hung up and stood in my hallway for a while. Then I walked through the house, slowly, room by room. not looking for anything specific, just looking. In the kitchen, there were food items in my cabinets that I hadn't bought, a brand of coffee I didn't drink, spices I didn't own. The dish towel I'd noticed earlier was hanging from the oven handle. There was another one on the counter near the sink. Someone had rearranged the items on the counter. My dish rack had been moved to the left, and a small decorative plant I didn't recognize was sitting where my coffee maker used to be. The coffee maker had been relocated to the corner near the refrigerator. Small things, individually nothing. Collectively, the entire geography of my kitchen had been adjusted to fit someone else's habits. In the living room, the couch had been angled slightly differently than I kept it. There was a throw blanket on the armchair that wasn't mine. The coffee table had a ring stain from a mug that hadn't been coasters under it. My bedroom door was closed and locked. I'd locked it before I left out of habit, and when I tried the handle, it held. Small mercy. I stood at the end of the hallway and looked at the closed door of my own bedroom and felt something I didn't have a clean word for. Not anger. Not quite. Something more like the sensation of watching someone walk through a space you thought was private and realizing you'd been wrong about what private meant. Marcus appeared from the living room. He had the decency, at least, to look slightly uncomfortable now that we were facing each other directly. He leaned against the doorframe with his arms crossed, which on him always looked defensive even when he didn't mean it to. "I was going to call you," he said. "When?" He shrugged. "When things settled down." "Marcus," I kept my voice even. I had to concentrate to do it. "This is my house." "I know that. You didn't ask me." Mom and Dad said it was fine. There it was, said simply, without apparent awareness of how it landed. Mom and Dad said it was fine. As though my parents had the authority to extend that invitation. As though the key I'd given them for emergencies had quietly upgraded itself into something else without anyone telling me. "They don't," I started. "Look, it's not a big deal," Marcus said. "It's only for a few months. Danielle and I just needed a place to land while we sorted out the wedding stuff. The apartment we were going to take fell through at the last second, and I know about the apartment. And Mom said the house was empty, and it's not empty, Marcus. My things are in it. My name is on the mortgage." He looked at me the way he always had when I pointed out something that inconvenienced him. Not guilty, just mildly put upon. Like I was the one making this difficult. "I'll talk to Mom and Dad," he said. "We'll figure something out." He went back to the living room. I heard the television volume go back up. I slept in my own bed that night and stared at the ceiling for a long time. In the morning, I called my parents again. I wanted to finish the conversation calmly, with clarity. I wanted there to be a plan with a timeline, something in writing, even just a clear spoken agreement that this was temporary and I was not expected to simply absorb it. What I got instead was the other thing. My mother mentioned it the way she mentioned most difficult things, tucked into the middle of a sentence, surrounded by softer words, as if the context would cushion the impact. "We did want to talk to you about the house," she said, "about the longer-term situation." I waited. "Your father and I have been talking, and, with the wedding, and where Marcus is in his life right now, we thought it might make sense, down the road, for him and Danielle to have more of a permanent arrangement." I was very still. "What does that mean?" I said. "Well," she paused, "we mentioned to Danielle's family and to some of the relatives that the house might be something we could work out, as a kind of gift with the wedding." "You told people my house was a wedding gift." "Not exactly like that." "Mom, did you tell people that Marcus was going to have my house?" The silence lasted 4 full seconds. I counted. "We thought we'd talk to you about it," she said. "We thought you'd understand, given everything." "Given what?" "Marcus is starting a family. He needs stability. You're—" She stopped herself, but not fast enough. "I'm what?" A careful breath on her end of the line. "You're not married yet. You're flexible. You'd have time to find something else." I sat with that for a moment. You'd have time to find something else. As though I hadn't spent 12 years building this specific something. As though the house was a placeholder I'd been keeping warm until my brother needed it. "I'm engaged," I said. "Quiet." "What?" "I've been seeing someone for 2 years. Her name is Claire. I proposed in March." I had not told my parents yet because I'd wanted to do it in person over a proper dinner, the way you do things you're happy about. We're getting married. My mother made a sound I couldn't quite categorize. Well, she said. Just that. Well, I waited for something else. Congratulations. Surprise. A question about Claire, who she was, what she was like, where we were thinking of having the wedding, any of the things a parent says when their child tells them they're engaged. Well, my mother said again, you should have said something sooner. I said I had to go. I hung up the phone, and then I called my father directly, because I needed someone to tell me I'd misheard or misunderstood, or that my mother had misspoken, and this wasn't actually what was happening. My father did not tell me any of those things. Your brother's situation is more urgent, he said. He's actually getting married now. You and Claire have time. Actually getting married. As though mine didn't count yet. As though an engagement only became real when my parents assigned it a value. And right now Marcus's wedding outranked mine by some calculation I'd never been shown. I asked him directly. Had he told people, relatives, Danielle's family, anyone, that Marcus would be getting my house? He was quiet for a moment. We were hoping you'd be willing to consider. Dad. It's just a conversation. Did you tell them, yes or no? The silence was its own answer. People got excited, he said finally. At Easter, your aunt was asking where Marcus and Danielle would live, and your mother mentioned the house, and it's my house. I know that. My name, the mortgage, I paid for it. I know, son, but family helps each other. I help, I said. I have been helping since I was 16 years old. I helped this family before Marcus was old enough to know what a bill was. My father didn't answer. I thought about my mother's voice saying well, just well, when I told her I was engaged. The pause before it. The recalibration. The way I could hear her filing the information away, not as something to celebrate but as a variable to account for. I want them out of my house, I said. Let's not do anything. I want them out. I'm giving Marcus 2 weeks to find somewhere else. You can't just. It's my house, Dad. I ended the call. I walked to the window of my bedroom and looked out at the backyard. The grass needed cutting. I'd been gone 6 weeks. The tree in the corner of the yard, a maple, already starting to think about fall, was exactly where it had always been. The house was quiet around me, but it didn't feel the way it used to feel. It felt like something had changed in the walls while I wasn't looking. Some invisible shift in what the space meant, and I wasn't sure yet how to shift it back. I stood there for a long time. And somewhere behind me, through the closed bedroom door, I heard the television still running. Marcus, comfortable, in my house, like he'd always been there, like he planned to stay. I didn't do it impulsively. I want to be clear about that, because later, when my aunt posted about it on Facebook, and my cousin called me cold-hearted, and my mother cried to my father, who relayed the crying to me like a weather report, people acted like I'd snapped. Like I'd woken up one morning in a rage and done something reckless. What I actually did was wait 3 days. 3 days of sleeping in my own house with my brother and his fiancée, occupying the guest room, using my kitchen every morning, existing in my space with a comfort level that suggested they had no intention of making this easy. 3 days of Marcus being vaguely pleasant and entirely evasive whenever I tried to have a direct conversation about timelines. 3 days of Danielle doing dishes and folding laundry in ways that were objectively helpful and somehow still made me feel like a stranger in my own hallway. On the 3rd night, Claire called. We talked for an hour. I sat on the back porch because it was the only place that still felt unambiguously mine. They hadn't spent much time in the backyard, and I told her everything. She was quiet through most of it, which was one of the things I'd loved about her from early on. She didn't rush to fix things. She just listened until I was done, and then she said, carefully, "What do you actually want to happen?" I thought about it. "I want my house back," I said. "Then that's what we work toward." I called a locksmith the next morning, had the locks changed on the front door, the back door, the side gate. I gave the new keys to no one except myself. Then I drafted a notice. I'd looked up the relevant statutes the night before: occupancy without written agreement, notice requirements, the whole tedious legal architecture of what happens when someone is living in your property without your consent. I'm not a lawyer. I knew that. But I also knew that paper created reality in a way that conversations didn't, and I needed something concrete, something that couldn't later be described as a misunderstanding or a family disagreement. The notice gave Marcus 14 days. I slid it under the guest room door on a Thursday morning, before either of them was awake. Then I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table and waited. Marcus came out at 8:15. He was holding the paper. He read it once, then looked up at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, the particular disbelief of someone who has never been told no and isn't sure the word applies to them. "What is this?" he said. "It explains itself. You're serving me with a notice. I'm your brother. You're my brother who's been living in my house for 3 weeks without asking me." He set the paper on the counter. "This is insane. You know that. This is genuinely insane. 14 days, Marcus." He stared at me. "Mom and Dad don't have a mortgage on this property," I said. "I do." He picked up the paper and walked back to the guest room and closed the door. He called my parents. I knew he'd called them because my mother called me 11 minutes later, and the way she said my name when I picked up, tight, careful, like she was handling something fragile, told me she'd already received his version of events. "You changed the locks," she said. "I did, without telling anyone. It's my house. He could have been locked out. He was home when the locksmith came. He has a key now, a new key, that I gave him for 14 more days." She was quiet. "This is not how we handle things in this family," she said. I thought about a lot of things then. The bill calendar on the refrigerator, the grocery store at 16, the 8 months of mortgage paperwork, my mother saying well when I told her I was engaged. "How do we handle things?" I asked. She didn't answer that. What happened next came in waves. My mother called my aunt, who called my cousins, who posted vaguely worded things on social media about family loyalty and people who forget where they came from. Nothing named me directly. It didn't have to. I got 3 texts from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, all containing variations of the same sentiment. Blood is blood. You'll regret this. He's your brother. My cousin Derek, Marcus's age, always closer to him, sent me a longer message. 2 paragraphs about how disappointing this was, how small it made me look, how the house was just a house and family was forever. I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the kitchen table and went to cut the grass. The grass needed cutting. That was something I could control. My father called 2 days later to tell me there was going to be a family meeting. I knew what a family meeting meant in our family. It meant a living room full of relatives, my parents at the center, and a general consensus forming before I walked through the door. It meant I would be asked to listen, and what listening would actually mean was agreeing. I said I'd be there. The meeting was at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. My aunt was there, and Derek, and 2 of my mother's cousins who I'd seen maybe 4 times in my adult life. My parents sat on the couch. Marcus sat in the armchair he'd always gravitated toward since he was a teenager. Danielle was there too, which surprised me, quiet, off to the side, her hands in her lap. I sat in a chair near the door. No one offered me anything to drink. I noticed that. My aunt started. She was my father's older sister, a woman who had always treated family hierarchy like a structural fact of the universe, immovable and self-evident. She talked about sacrifice, about how family means giving things up sometimes, about how Marcus was building something and needed support, and wasn't this exactly what family was for? I let her finish. Then one of my mother's cousins said something about perspective, about how when you zoomed out, property was less important than people. I let him finish too. My father said he hoped we could find a solution that worked for everyone. Marcus said nothing. He was looking at his hands. When the room ran out of things to say and everyone was looking at me, I asked one question. Whose name is on the mortgage? Silence. I'm asking a simple question, I said. The mortgage on the house Marcus is currently living in. Whose name is on it? My aunt opened her mouth. Not a speech, I said. Just the name. More silence. Mine, I said. It's my name. I sign the papers. I make the payments. I made every payment for 3 years every month on time with money I earned. I looked at my father. I gave you and Mom a key for emergencies. I didn't give you the house. My father looked at the floor. I understand that Marcus is getting married, I continued. I understand that things didn't work out with the apartment. I understand that this is difficult, but I'm also getting married to a woman named Claire who some of you are learning about for the first time right now, because when I told Mom and Dad I was engaged, the conversation moved on in about 30 seconds. I paused. We need somewhere to live too. The room was very quiet. Marcus looked up. You never said, he started. I told Mom and Dad. They didn't tell you. I looked at my mother. She was looking at her hands. I thought it wasn't the right time, she said. Marcus stared at her. I stood up. 14 days, I said. That's still the timeline. I'm not angry. I don't want this to be a war. But I need my house back, and I need everyone in this room to understand that giving it away was never something my parents had the authority to do. I picked up my jacket. Derek said something under his breath. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I drove home. The house was empty when I got back. Marcus and Danielle had gone to the meeting with me and hadn't returned yet. I stood in the living room for a few minutes in the quiet, and it felt, briefly, like mine again. Just briefly. Danielle knocked on my bedroom door that evening. I wasn't expecting it. Marcus I'd anticipated, some version of the conversation where he'd either double down or try to negotiate. But Danielle standing in the hallway, still in her jacket from the meeting, looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately categorize, that I hadn't prepared for. Can I talk to you for a minute? She said. I stepped back and let her into the doorway. She didn't come all the way in, just stood at the threshold, which felt deliberate. I didn't know, she said. I waited. About the house, about whose it was. She spoke carefully, the way people do when they're being precise because precision matters. Marcus told me his family had a property, that it was available, that it was being sorted out. He made it sound like... She stopped. He made it sound like it was already arranged. I looked at her. Your parents, she said. They talked to my parents at Easter, said the house would be part of that, they were going to help Marcus get settled. My mom thought it was, she exhaled. She thought it was a family gift, a wedding thing. It's not, I said. I know that now. She was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. I genuinely didn't know. I was walking into someone else's home. I thought about that. About how she'd come out of the kitchen that first night with the dish towel, the pleasant smile, the 6 words. You're home early. How she'd said it without any awareness that she was standing in the wrong story. She hadn't been cruel. She'd just been told a different version of events. Where did Marcus tell you the house came from? I asked. She hesitated. He said his family was sorting it for you too, she said. That there was a family property that was going to be sorted out. He was vague about the details. Vague about the details. I nodded slowly. Does he know that you're talking to me? I asked. She shook her head. I looked at her for a moment. This woman who was engaged to my brother, who had packed her clothes into my guest room in good faith, who had rearranged items on my kitchen counter with the genuine intention of being helpful in what she'd been led to believe was a shared space. I appreciate you telling me, I said. She nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but didn't. She went back down the hallway. I heard the guest room door close, and through the wall, faintly, I heard her and Marcus talking. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone, and the tone was not good. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the muffled sound of my brother's life beginning to come apart in my guest room. And I felt, for the first time since I'd come home to find his boots by my front door, something that wasn't quite anger. It was something closer to clarity. The picture was becoming whole, and it was worse than I'd thought. I found out about the debt by accident. That's the honest version. I wasn't investigating. I wasn't looking for ammunition. What happened was that a piece of mail arrived addressed to Marcus. A thick envelope, the kind with a clear plastic window that shows the name and address inside. And it was sitting on the kitchen counter when I came downstairs one morning, and the return address on the front was a collections agency. I didn't open it, but I looked at it for a long time. That afternoon, I called Derek. This might seem like an odd choice, given that Derek had sent me the 2-paragraph message about family loyalty. But Derek, whatever his flaws, had never been good at keeping Marcus's secrets when he was directly asked about them. There was something in him that defaulted to honesty under pressure, some wiring that made direct questions uncomfortable to dodge. I asked him what he knew about Marcus's financial situation. A long pause. Why are you asking me? Because you've known him longer than anyone, and you're not going to lie to me. Another pause. Then, how much do you want to know? I told him everything. It came out in pieces, the way things do when someone is simultaneously trying to be honest and trying to be loyal to two people at once. Derek talking slowly, stopping, starting again, qualifying things, and me listening and adding up numbers in my head. The car Marcus drove leased, 2 payments behind. The credit cards, 4 of them, 3 maxed out, 1 near the limit. A personal loan he'd taken out the previous year, somewhere in the range of $12,000, origin unclear. The apartment that had fallen through, Derek's phrasing became careful here, hadn't exactly fallen through. Marcus had failed the credit check. He hadn't told Danielle any of this. I sat with the phone against my ear and looked at the collection agency envelope still sitting on my counter. Does she know? I asked. Derek was quiet. I don't think she knows the numbers, he said. I think she knows things are tight. I don't think she knows how tight. I thanked him and ended the call. I thought about Danielle standing in my doorway the night before, telling me she hadn't known whose house this was. The careful precision of her, the way she'd said he was vague about the details, and how I'd heard that and thought I understood what it meant. I was only beginning to understand what it meant. I didn't tell Danielle about the finances directly. I want to be clear about that too, because later it would get characterized differently. What I did was leave the collection agency envelope on the counter where it had been left for me. And when Danielle came downstairs that morning and saw it, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my coffee, and I did not move it or explain it or apologize for its presence. She picked it up, read the front, set it back down. She didn't say anything to me. She made her coffee in silence, and I read something on my phone in silence, and the envelope sat on the counter between us like a third presence in the room. An hour later, I heard her, and Marcus in the guest room. I couldn't make out the words this time either, but the conversation lasted a long time, and at one point the volume rose, not shouting, but the particular intensity of two people who are past the stage of being careful with each other. And then it dropped again, and then there was silence, and then I heard one set of footsteps moving through the house and the back door opening and closing. Marcus sat on the back porch alone for about 40 minutes. I watched him from the kitchen window for a while. He was sitting in one of the porch chairs, hunched forward with his elbows on his knees, looking at the yard. Not his yard, my yard. But he looked, in that moment, less like someone who'd been caught in a lie and more like someone who'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and had just been told he could no longer set it down here. I almost felt something for him then. Almost. Then I remembered the boots by the front door. His annoyance when I walked in. The way he'd said Mom and Dad said it was fine, with no apparent understanding of what that meant. I made a second cup of coffee and went to my home office. The wedding didn't collapse dramatically. That's not how these things usually happen. I've come to understand. There's a version of events where Danielle throws a ring across a room, and Marcus says something cutting and doors slam, and it's all very cinematic. That's not what I witnessed. What I witnessed was quieter and, in its way, worse. Over the following 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of the 14 I'd given them, something shifted in the guest room. The door was closed more often. The conversations I could hear through the wall became shorter. Danielle started making phone calls in the backyard in the mornings, speaking too quietly for me to hear, and Marcus started leaving the house earlier and coming back later, the way people do when home has become a place that holds an uncomfortable conversation they're not ready to have. Danielle's mother called the house once. I knew because Danielle took it in the kitchen, and I heard enough to understand that her mother was asking questions that Danielle was struggling to answer. About the finances, about the house, about the timeline for when they'd have their own place. Danielle's voice stayed steady throughout. Whatever she was feeling, she wasn't going to feel it where anyone could see her. I respected that about her. The ring was still on her finger when they moved out. They left on a Thursday, 2 days before the 14-day deadline. I came home from work and the guest room door was open and the clothing rack was gone, and the bed had been stripped and remade with my original duvet, which they'd found folded in the closet, and returned to its place with a neatness that felt like an apology. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Danielle's handwriting. I could tell. She wrote small and precisely, the letters leaning slightly right. It said, "I'm sorry for the confusion. I hope things work out." Nothing from Marcus. I stood in the guest room doorway for a while, looking at the space they'd vacated. My boxes were still stacked in the corner where they'd been pushed. The window light was the same. The room was the same room it had always been. But something about standing there felt like the end of something larger than just those 2 weeks. I found out 3 weeks later that the wedding had been postponed indefinitely. Derek told me. He said it with the tone of someone delivering information they expect to be received as good news and aren't sure if it is. I wasn't sure either. Marcus called me that night, first time since he'd left. He said one sentence, "I hope you're happy." Then he hung up. I sat with the dead phone for a while. No, I thought, that's not the right word for it. I discovered the last thing by chance, the way I discovered the debt. I was filing my taxes. It was February by then, 3 months after Marcus and Danielle had moved out, 4 months since I'd come home to find his boots by the door, and I was going through a folder of documents I kept in my home office, the kind of folder where you put things that need to be kept but don't need to be looked at regularly. Insurance papers, the original mortgage documents, my car registration. The folder was not where I'd left it. I noticed because I have a particular system for these things, a specific location for each folder in the filing cabinet, and the mortgage folder was in the wrong slot. One slot to the left of where it should have been. A small thing. The kind of thing you'd only notice if you'd put it there yourself. I took it out and went through it. Everything was there. Nothing was missing. But the papers had been handled. The order was slightly off. A couple of pages not quite aligned the way I kept them. Someone had gone through this folder. I stood at my filing cabinet for a long time. Then I thought about my mother saying, "We stopped by to check on things," and stopped by again, and everything was fine. I thought about the 3 weeks Marcus had been in the house before I came home, and the 2 weeks after. I thought about what a motivated person might look for in a filing cabinet if they were trying to understand the finances of a property they'd promised to someone else. My mortgage documents, my insurance papers, my personal financial records. I called my mother. I asked her, plainly, if she or my father had gone through my files while I was away. The pause was answer enough. "We needed to understand the situation," she said. "With the mortgage, and whether there was any way to." "You went through my personal documents," I said. "In my house, without asking me. We have a key. For emergencies." This was not an emergency. "You used the key I gave you to access my home and go through my private financial records because you were trying to find a way to give my house to Marcus." She started to say something about intentions, about how they'd only wanted to understand. I didn't let her finish. Not out of anger, not because I was trying to punish her. I stopped her because I realized, standing there in my home office with the mortgage folder in my hand, that there was nothing she could say that would change the thing I was now looking at clearly. My parents had not overstepped. They had made a decision. Somewhere along the way, maybe gradually, maybe so gradually they hadn't noticed it happening, that my house was a family resource, that my savings and my mortgage and my 12 years of overtime were inputs into a family system that they managed, and that what that system needed right now was to support Marcus, so the resource would be redirected. They hadn't asked me because, on some level, they hadn't thought they needed to. I was the responsible one. The responsible one figures something out. I sat down at my desk. I thought about the bill calendar on the refrigerator, the grocery store at 16, the handshake from my father when I showed him the house, the pride in his voice, how I'd held on to that. I thought about just when I told my mother I was engaged. I thought about Marcus on my back porch, hunched forward, looking at a yard that wasn't his. And I thought about Claire, who was coming over for dinner that night, who had sat with me on the phone while I was in Denver and asked what I actually wanted, and listened while I figured out the answer. I picked up my phone. I sent my parents a message. It was not long. It said that I needed some time, that I would be in touch, and that until further notice I would not be available for family events or family conversations. It said that the key I had given them had been for emergencies, and that I would need it returned. I put the phone down. I did not feel the way I had expected to feel. I had expected anger, or grief, or some version of the complicated sadness that comes with acknowledging something you've known for a long time without letting yourself know it. What I felt instead was something quieter, something close to done. I went to the kitchen and started making dinner. Claire arrived at 6:30, let herself in with her own key. the key I'd given her, the one that meant something specific and nothing else. And she found me at the stove, and she set her bag down and asked how my day was. Long, I said. She came and stood next to me. She didn't ask anything else. She didn't need to. That, I thought, was the difference. That had always been the difference. Claire and I got married on a Saturday in October. 43 people. That was the guest list. 43, which I know sounds like a specific number to remember, but I remember it because I counted them at one point during the reception. I was standing near the bar with a drink in my hand, and I looked around the room at these 43 people, and I thought, every single person in this room chose to be here. No one came out of obligation. No one came because a family system required their attendance. 43 people who actually wanted to be in the same room as us. It was the most crowded I'd felt in years. We held it at a venue about 20 minutes from the house, a converted farmhouse with exposed beams and long wooden tables and string lights that Claire had spent 3 weekends thinking about. She had opinions about string lights. Specific, considered opinions. I had not known this about her before the wedding planning process, and discovering it was one of the small, unexpected gifts of that year. I wore a navy suit. She wore a dress she'd found at a small boutique in the city, cream-colored, simple, exactly right for her. There was no moment during the ceremony where I thought about Marcus, or my parents, or the guest room with the clothing rack, or the collection agency envelope on the kitchen counter. I want to be honest about that. I'd imagined beforehand that those things would intrude, that I'd be standing at the altar and some part of my brain would pull me sideways into everything that had happened. It didn't. What I thought about, standing there while the officiant spoke, was the floor of my empty living room the night I got the keys. The bare hardwood, the smell of the old owners, the particular silence of a space adjusting to a new person. I'd sat on that floor and thought it was enough. I hadn't known then that it would become more than enough. Claire squeezed my hand at some point during the vows, not because anything was wrong, just because she was there and she wanted me to know she was there, and I looked at her, and that was the whole thing. That was all of it. We danced badly to a song we both loved. We ate food that was genuinely good. We drove home at 11:30, and Claire fell asleep in the passenger seat with her shoes off and her feet on the dashboard, and I drove through the quiet streets thinking about nothing in particular, which is its own kind of peace. I carried her inside. She woke up enough to laugh at me for trying. We stood in the entryway of the house, her in her wedding dress and me in my suit jacket, and she looked around the hallway, the coat closet, the scuff on the baseboard she'd heard about but hadn't noticed before, and she said, "This is ours now. Not mine, ours." "Yeah," I said. "Good," she said, and went to change out of the dress. I stood in the entryway for a moment after she left. The house was quiet, but it was a different quiet than it had been the night I came home from Denver. Not the quiet of an occupied space that had been rearranged to fit someone else. The quiet of a place that knew who lived in it. I turned off the entryway light and went upstairs. My mother called 3 times in the months after the wedding. I let the first 2 go to voicemail. The messages were similar in tone, careful, slightly formal, the way people speak when they know they're being recorded and are aware they might be wrong. She said she missed me. She said she hoped Claire and I were well. She said she thought we should talk when I was ready. I listened to both messages twice each. I called her back on the 3rd attempt. We spoke for about 20 minutes. She did not apologize in the way I needed her to apologize, not because she was unwilling, I think, but because she genuinely didn't understand what the apology needed to contain. She kept framing things as misunderstandings, miscommunications, wanting what was best for everyone. I didn't argue with her. I said I understood. I said I needed time. I said I would be in touch. What I didn't say was that some things, once you've seen them clearly, don't go back to being unclear. That the problem was never the individual events, the guest room, the key, the filing cabinet, but the architecture underneath them. The way I had been understood by my parents as a function rather than a person. You don't fix that with a conversation. You just carry it differently. My father never called. I don't know what that means, exactly. Maybe he thought my mother was handling it. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe there's a version of him that understood what had happened better than my mother did, and the understanding made it harder to dial. I left space for the possibility that I didn't have the full picture of his interior life. But I didn't reach for the phone, either. Marcus and I didn't speak for a long time. When we finally did, almost a year later, at a distant cousin's graduation party that we both attended because we hadn't known the other would be there. It was brief. Polite in the way that people are polite when the alternative is a scene neither of them wants to make in public. He looked tired, not sad exactly, just worn in the way that people get when life keeps not working out, and they're running low on explanations for why. We stood near the food table and made 3 minutes of conversation about nothing. He asked how Claire was. I said she was good. I asked how he was doing. He said fine, in the tone that means the opposite. He didn't mention the house. Neither did I. We drifted to different parts of the room and didn't speak again for the rest of the evening. I drove home and told Claire about it. She listened the way she always listened. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it honestly. "Like I ran into someone I used to know," I said. She nodded. That was accurate. That was the most accurate way I'd found to describe it. 3 years pass faster than you expect them to. Or maybe they don't. And it's just that when you're living inside a life that fits you, time moves differently. Less friction. Less of your energy going toward managing things that shouldn't need managing. Claire and I repainted the living room. We argued mildly about the color for 2 weeks, and then agreed on something neither of us had originally suggested, which felt like a good sign. We got a dog. A medium-sized rescue mutt named Walter who was deeply neurotic about thunderstorms and deeply unconcerned about everything else. We built a garden in the backyard that was more ambitious than our skill level, failed at tomatoes 2 years in a row, and finally succeeded on the third. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that feel, from the outside, like nothing and feel, from the inside, like everything. My parents lost their house. I found out from Derek, who had maintained a cautious, intermittent contact with me throughout, occasionally texting, occasionally surfacing with information I hadn't asked for but didn't refuse. The way Derek explained it, Marcus had needed money. More than once, more than twice. The loans my parents had extended quietly, over time, without telling anyone, had accumulated. They'd refinanced their house once trying to manage it. Then again. Then the payments became something they couldn't sustain on their retirement income. They moved into an apartment the following spring. My father called me when it happened. It was the first time he'd called in almost 2 years. His voice sounded older. Not frail, my father was not a frail man, but compressed somehow, like something had been taken out of it. He told me what had happened. Matter-of-factly, the way he'd always communicated difficult things. He didn't ask me for help directly. But the shape of the call was the shape of a person who is telling you a thing because they believe, on some level, that telling you the thing is the first step toward you fixing it. I listened to everything he said. I told him I was sorry to hear it. I told him that if there was ever a genuine emergency, health, safety, something acute, he should call me and I would help. I told him that I couldn't take on the ongoing situation. He was quiet for a moment. "Your brother," he started. "I know," I said. "He's struggling." "I know, Dad." Another silence. "We made some mistakes," he said. Not an apology exactly. More like a man looking at a map and identifying, finally, where the route had gone wrong. Too late to go back. Not quite ready to say he should have gone differently. "Yeah," I said. "You turned out all right," he said. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't. "Take care of yourself," I said. We hung up. I sat in my home office for a while. Then I went downstairs to where Claire was reading on the couch with Walter asleep across her feet, and I sat down next to her, and she looked up from her book. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. She went back to her book. I sat there in the quiet and thought about my father's voice, about my mother's voicemails, about Marcus at the graduation party, tired around the eyes. I thought about the bill calendar on the refrigerator. I thought about the grocery store at 16. I thought about sitting on the bare floor of this house, the night I got the keys, alone in the dark, and thinking it was enough. It was enough. It still was. We were on the back porch when the last light went. October again, the 3rd October since the wedding, the 6th since I'd bought the house. The maple in the corner of the yard had gone fully red, the way it did every year around this time. And the air had that particular early evening quality of a fall day cooling faster than expected. And Claire had her hands wrapped around a mug, and Walter was lying between us on the porch boards, twitching occasionally in whatever dream he was having. The yard was quiet. The neighborhood was quiet. Inside the house, the lights were on, the warm kind. The kind I'd replaced those flickering fixtures with in the first month. And through the kitchen window I could see the counter, the dish rack in its correct position, the absence of anything that didn't belong there. Claire said something about the tomatoes next year. A different variety. She'd been reading about it. I said I thought we could try. She leaned against me slightly, the way she did when she wasn't thinking about it. Just the automatic inclination of someone who has decided this is where they want to be. I looked at the yard. My yard. I thought about a Tuesday evening in October, years ago, when I'd driven a different route home from work and slowed down in front of a house with a porch light on. How I'd sat in my car and taken a photo of a listing number. I spent 12 years earning this house. My brother spent 12 minutes moving into it. And somehow, for a while, my parents thought I was the selfish one for wanting it back. I don't think about that much anymore. Not because it stopped being true, but because I stopped needing it to be anything other than what it was. A thing that happened. A thing I got through. A line in the longer story of figuring out what I actually wanted and who actually belonged in my life while I was building it. The maple caught the last of the light and held it for a moment. That specific red. That specific October quality of things being exactly themselves before they let go. Walter twitched in his dream. Claire finished her tea. The porch light came on automatically as the sky darkened, the way it always did. Warm, ordinary, mine.